is the pollen of the same flower may fall on the stigma of the same flower. That is called as autogamy. So in pollination we see that the pollen may fall onto the stigma of the same flower. That is autogamy. If the pollen of the flower falls on the stigma, the pollen of another flower falls on the stigma of a flower, then it is of the same plant, then it is called as dichotogamy. That means the pollen of another flower of the same plant is falling on the stigma of another flower, then it is called as dichotogamy. The pollen of a flower of another plant of same species, that means two different plants are there, two different rose plants. So the pollen of one plant falls on the stigma of another plant of the same species is called as allogamy. Now, kinds of pollination, there are two kinds of pollination, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. Under self-pollination, that is allogamy, where the pollen falls onto the stigma of the same flower of the same plant. In cross-pollination, you see that where dichotogamy will take place, where the pollen falls onto the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Now, what are the causes of self-pollination? Why self-pollination will take place? First is because of the bisexuality, both male and female flower present on the male and female organs present in the same flower. Like this is a bisexual flower in which you see male and female organs are present on the same flower. Then next is homogamy. In homogamy, anther and stigma of the same flower mature at the same time. That means maturity of these two are at the same time. So also you will have self-pollination. Now, what are the advantages of self-pollination? Under self-pollination, we see that parental characters are preserved. You will find a true copy of the parent produced. There is no wastage of pollen grain. All the pollen are falling on the stigma of the same flower. The flowers need not be very large and showy. No need of having any nectaries or scent in the flower to attract insects. What is the disadvantage of self-pollination? The disadvantage of self-pollination is, as it is the same true copy of the parent, there may be some weakening characteristics. Weakening of the variety of species can be there. The weaker breeds cannot be eliminated because the parent is weak, the offspring will be naturally weak, so it cannot be eliminated, and it does not yield a very good variety also. Now, under cross-pollination, we see that it is the transfer of pollen from another flower to the stigma of another flower of the same plant or another plant of the same species. So here two different plants are there of the same species. There is one rose plant here, one rose plant here. The pollen of one rose plant falls on the stigma of another rose plant of the same species. Then it is called as cross-pollination. What are the advantages of cross-pollination? Advantages is the offsprings are very healthier. The seeds are produced in abundant amount. New varieties can be obtained. Why? Because it is not a true copy of their parent. So new varieties are obtained. Disadvantages is pollination depends on an external agent. External agent like either wind, insects or water and so on. There will be a lot of wastage of pollen here and it is uneconomical also. Then reasons behind cross-pollination, how cross-pollination can take place and why it will take place. It is because of the bisexuality. Maybe the plant is either male or female. Then digogamy, that is anther and stigma are maturing at different times. If anther is maturing first, it is called as protandry. If gynoecium is maturing first, then it is called as protogyny. Then self-sterility. Like though this is a bisexual flower, maybe the stamen is not mature or the flower is sterile. Sterile means if the pollen of the same flower falls on the stigma, it may not go for fertilization. So that is called as self-sterility. Next is hercogamy. In hercogamy, what happens? The pollen cannot reach the stigma of the same flower because of some mechanical barrier. Maybe there is one mechanical barrier here. There is some structure which does not allow the pollen to fall on the stigma of the same flower. Now, what are the, as we have studied in the characteristics of cross-pollination, cross-pollination entomophilous. Entomo means insect. Wind pollinated. Anemophilous. Water pollinated. Hydrophilous. Now what are the conditions required for insect pollination? The flowers need to be very large so that they can attract the insects. The flowers need to be bright colored. The flowers need to have a scent and nectar in it, and pollen grains should be very sticky so that they can attach themselves to the body of the insect. Stigma also should be very sticky so that when the insect is sitting on the stigma, it sheds all the pollen on it, and flowers tend to be very in clusters, group of flowers. Conditions for wind pollination: flowers are very small. Flowers are very small because it is through wind. They need not be bright colored. They need not have to produce scent, but the flower stamens need to be long and hang out of the flower. Anthers need to be very long and usually attached. This anther should be very long and usually attached. Pollen is produced in large quantities. Pollen grains should be dry and smooth. Stigmas should be feathery. The stigma should be feathery so that it can take the pollen in it. Conditions of water pollination: pollen grains are produced in very large numbers because half of them will get drained out in water, so they need to produce in very large numbers, and pollen grains need to have a gravity so that they can keep floating on the water, and male flowers should float on water so that they reach the female flower. Artificial pollination. Artificial pollination is a pollination where man is dusting the pollen onto the stigma of the flower. Not any agent, but man himself, when he dusts the pollen on the stigma of the flower, then it is called as artificial pollination. Structure of male gamete or pollen grain. The structure of the male gamete or pollen grain is this. This is the structure of the male gamete and this is the structure of the female gamete. So you need to learn the diagrams of male and female. In the structure of male gamete, you see that the mature pollen is having double wall. Outer wall is called as exine. It is very rough, and inner wall is smooth. It is called as intine. So outer wall exine, inner wall is intine, and there is a nucleus present in the center which is divided into a tube nucleus and generative nucleus. So the nucleus is divided into two parts, tube nucleus and generative nucleus. That was the structure of the male. Now the structure of female gamete or the ovule. This is the structure of the female gamete or the ovule, whose diagram you have to learn by heart. It can come in the test. Now each ovule is having one or two protective layers. So this ovule, this is the structure of the mature ovule. This is the structure of the mature ovule, in which there are two layers are there which are called as integuments. Now the integuments have a small opening which is called as a micropyle. When I am teaching this part, you have to look into the textbook so that you can understand. Each ovule has one or two protective layers which is called as integuments. The integuments leave a small opening which is called as the micropyle. Integuments enclose the nucellus. Inside the integuments there is a nucellus. Inside the nucellus there is a embryo sac. Inside that embryo sac it contains 3 plus 3 plus 1 cell. Out of this, 3 cells are micropylar, are present at the micropylar end where there is an opening, 1 egg cell and 2 synergids. 3 cells are present to the opposite side of the micropylar end which are called as antipodal cells. 1 large central egg cell is present which is having 2 nuclei called the polar nuclei. Now, fertilization is the process of fusion of male gamete with the female gamete. When the pollen fuses with the egg cell, then fertilization takes place. What happens after fertilization? What are the changes that take place in the parts of the ovule after fertilization is completely given in your PDF and also in the textbook, which you have to learn.